Hi everybody, it's Don, and today we're going to take a walk through some of the trails at Great Seal State Park outside of Chillicothe, Ohio. I wasn't intending to do an episode today, but it turned out to be such a nice day, I had to stop and see what we can see. All right, so let's take a walk at Great Seal State Park. All right, well, here we are at Great Seal State Park. This is a park located just outside of Chillicothe, Ohio. And this park and the area that it encompasses, which is about 1,800 acres, represents the edge of the Allegheny Plateau in Ohio. So if you go north and west of here, Ohio was mostly glaciated by the Illinois and Wisconsin glaciers. But once you hit this point and points east and south from here, Ohio was not glaciated. So that leads to the kind of hilly terrain that we're going to hike today, which is kind of the first hilly hike I've taken with you on the Naturalist so far. People kind of forget that Ohio does have hills, okay? But the southeastern third of the state is very forested and very hilly. And so we're going to see some different trees and sorts of things than we've seen so far. I've mostly been in southwestern Ohio with limestone bedrock as our soil base. But here we're into the sandstone region, and that gives different properties to the soil, leads to different tree communities, plant communities, wildlife, and so forth. So now Great Seal State Park is made up of numerous trails. I'll just kind of show you this trail map, and there's lots of options for hikes here. You can get up on top of these ridges and hike long distances on top of the ridge. You can go up and down hills. There are mountain bike trails here, disc golf courses, picnic shelters, and even I think a camping area as well in this park somewhere. I've been here several times, and I'm always impressed with the abundance of large trees and beautiful forest that's present here, along with the hilly terrain, which is something I enjoy. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and this is the kind of terrain that I'm familiar with, and that I really appreciate. So we're going to take a hike up what's called Bunker Hill. In this area, anyone who drives east toward Chillicothe sees these hills rise out of the plain, essentially. These pointed or rounded hills that really stand out. In fact, they've even made it onto the Ohio state flag. It's really striking, okay? These hills that rise out. There's Sugar Loaf Mountain, for example, is a nice pointy mountain here. And but what we're going to hike today is called Bunker Hill. I'll probably go to some of those other locations on other trips, but we're going to do Bunker Hill, see what that has to offer. Now, before I do that, I'm going to just point out something. Since I talk a lot about trees and big trees and their possible ages, I just want to give you some feeling for how you age a tree and how the size relates to age for different species. So in this area, there were a number of trees that were knocked down. There's a red oak over here. There's a white oak. There's a sugar maple beside me. And I'm going to focus on this white oak here because these are among our oldest trees that we see on these sorts of walks around here in Ohio. And let's talk a little bit about how big and old these trees are with some measurements. So first of all, I have a measuring tape in my hand here. We're going to measure just the diameter of this tree. Okay, this tree is about 1 foot 5 inches in diameter, okay? I counted the rings in this tree a little earlier, and there were 90 annual rings in this tree at this part in the trunk, all right? So there's a tree that's not even 1.5 feet in diameter. It's 90 years old, okay? So when I make estimates, as we're walking and looking at 3 and 4 and sometimes 5 foot diameter trees and say that they are 300 and 400 years old, you see where that relationship comes from. There's about, in a white oak, there's about 100 annual rings in a, kind of your average white oak per maybe 1.5 feet, okay? That's an estimate. It depends on how fast they grew, how well, how much, how many resources they had at their disposal, water, nutrients, whether there was competition around and so forth. There's a lot of variability in that. But I just want to impress upon you how old these trees can be, given what looks like a, nice tree, but not a giant tree. So this thing right here, this part of this trunk is 90 years old. Okay, now this isn't the bottom of this tree. The bottom of the tree is over there, okay? If you were to cut it there and count it, it's even older, okay? That part of the tree is older than this part by several years at least, okay? Probably 5 years older at that point. So that's just a little bit about how the relationship between age and size. This tree down in front of us right now is a red oak, a northern red oak, and you could do the same kind of thing. Okay, so here's a branch off of this red oak, and red oaks grow faster than white oaks, but in my look between these two, they grew at about the same rate. This one did not grow particularly fast. That means over there, if I were to take the time to count the rings, which I might do off camera later, this tree could be 150 years old, okay? So that's that, all right? So I'm doing this too because I anticipate that we're going to see a lot of large trees. I might be espousing a little bit about how old I speculate they are. That's how you do it. That's just, by experience. I've done that enough times to kind of roughly know, how old these things are. And the knowledge that plants like white oak, trees like white oak grow fairly slowly. That varies a lot, again, as I said, even within, say, the oaks. You have slow-growing oaks, you have fast-growing oaks. Plants like beech, trees like beech. We're going to see some big beech trees, I believe. They grow slowly. Big shagbark hickories grow slowly, and so forth. In contrast, trees like tulip tree grow quite quickly. Sycamores grow pretty quickly. Walnuts grow pretty quickly. All right, so we're proceeding up the trail. Quite a bit of activity here today. It's still, it's quite beautiful out here. So there's a lot of use of the parks, which is a good thing. And this area also has mountain bike trails. So there are people who use this area to do that. Pretty challenging terrain for that, in fact, probably amongst the more challenging areas for mountain bikes, just because of how hilly it is in Ohio. All right, so crossing a little ravine here. Still nice golden yellows. A lot of trees have lost their leaves at this point, though. The trails can be a little confusing here. The trail maps don't always agree with all the trails that you find. So we're going to do our best. Okay, I think this is the way to Bunker Hill. Little lowland area with black walnuts, spice bushes. Of course, being a lowland area, it's moister soils. We'll start to crawl up. On the drive in, I had a buck almost run across the road right in front of me. That was kind of fun. Okay, this one I might be out of breath as I'm walking because there are lots of hills here. A lot of the trails, by the way, they kind of have different names for the mountain bike part of the trail compared to what's on the hiking trail map. So that can be a little bit confusing as well. I hear woodpeckers in the distance. Here's an interesting tree. This is a white oak with really interesting bark. Almost looks like a shagbark hickory. It's so shaggy. Get a little closer to this. If you look up there, it's a very shaggy white oak. Very interesting. I see a lot of that kind of morphology in this area. There's another large tree up here. Very similar looking. Take a look at that. Yeah, very flaky. Wow, there was a massive explosion. Just came from sort of the direction of Chillicothe itself. Wow, I don't know what that was. Wow, I've never quite heard anything like that in the woods before. Holy cow. That made my heart race. Oh, well, I guess we'll have to read about what that is in the news later, or listen later. That was incredible. I'm probably here about 3 or 4 miles outside of Chillicothe itself proper. And, you know, it's a sizable town. There's lots of stuff that goes on there. And that was a large explosion. Almost sounded like a bomb. Amazing. Okay. Well, back to our regularly scheduled program. Yeah, white oak. This is a really beautiful tree. Really interesting variable bark there. And what I think I'll do on this tree as well is demonstrate the use of this DBH tape. Okay, again, you know, this tree, we can't cut it down and count its annual rings to see how old it is, but we can make some estimates based on its diameter. And diameter is a function of the circumference of the tree. And for those of you who remember this equation, the diameter is equal to the circumference divided by pi, 3.14. Now, I think in past episodes, I've talked about where you typically measure a tree when you want to get its diameter. And it's at about 4.5 feet off of the ground, okay? And that, again, is to get up and above what's called the root flare, all right? So that you're outside the influence of that flaring base of the trunk. And you get kind of a true measure of the bole, B-O-L-E, the bole. Okay, so let's use this diameter tape, and I'm going to try to hook it on a piece of bark here. I think that'll do. And let's use this side. Whoops. This is easier if you have a buddy along with you, but we'll do our best here. Try to hook it. Let's see. We'll go the other direction. Wow, this is a little little tougher than I anticipated here. Hang on. Okay, I think that will do it. All right, so I have it just hooked on a piece of bark, right about 4.5 feet above the ground, what we call breast height. And let's just go around, take this around. Okay, so that tree is about 34 inches in diameter. All right, so just shy of 3 feet in diameter. All right, now down the hill there, we measured a tree that was basically 1.5 feet in diameter, and which was 90 years old at that portion of the stem. Okay, this tree is twice the diameter, 3 feet roughly, and so you can make some assumptions that if its growth rate was similar to what we saw below. Of course, that's making assumptions, but that would make this tree 180 years old. Okay, anywhere from 150 to 200 I think would be fair. And so that gives you an idea. 3-foot tree, close to 200 years old, maybe 250 depending on the growth conditions. But again, in Ohio, we have white oaks that are 7 feet in diameter. Okay, easily twice the diameter of this and more. All right, so just using that math, we're talking 400, 500, up to 600-year-old trees. So now, as I stand here, I see something interesting on it. There's a katydid. Okay, I will attempt to grab this thing, but I want to show it to you before I do that, in case I miss. So you see how the katydid has basically a leaf mimicking body pattern, both in its shape and its coloration, as these things typically are up in the branches, in the leaves, and they hide in plain sight with that coloration and that shape. Okay, so these things are herbivores. Let's see if we can get a hold of it. Okay, now, there it is. Now this katydid I can see is missing one large back leg. Okay, that might be why it's basically kind of so slow. It's sort of chilly out here as well. These things are, really slowing down for the season. This one might have been attacked actually by something, a bird perhaps, if they found it, noticed it. But their patterns and coloration are really amazing. Amazing form of mimicry. Okay, natural biomimicry. The insect mimicking a leaf to disguise itself. All right, so I hope that's pretty visible to you all. And I will then let this go to its devices. Okay, the call of katydids, of course, is like the sound of summer, sound of late summer. And there, it flew away. Right back where it came from, okay? So here it is. All right, so best of luck. And thanks, white oak. Now, one thing I anticipate seeing here, let's see, where am I? I need to follow this trail up. I guess we have to go this way a bit. One thing I anticipate seeing today are some different oak species than what we've seen in the past, including something called chestnut oak. I expect to run across that. So I'll be on the special lookout for that one. Especially big ones. Okay, there are a lot of switchbacks here to facilitate climbing these hills, especially when you're on a bike. So here's another nice white oak. Well, I can say, excuse me, I'm seeing the leaves of chestnut oak on the ground in front of me. So, and here's a small chestnut oak. Let's go look at a little larger one over here. Yeah. Chestnut oak is very recognizable by its bark. Okay, it has a really thick, blocky, furrowed, deeply furrowed bark. And it has a leaf that resembles chestnut leaf. Okay, so this is a chestnut oak leaf. Okay, it's not lobed, as you can see. It does have small stridulations, you could say, or edges. It is in the white oak group. Okay, so the edges, the tips of those lobes does not have a bristle. Okay, and it's a common tree in Appalachian, Ohio, and surrounding states, on ridge tops, where there's sandstone bedrock, more acidic soils. You get a lot of chestnut oak. You can find these things growing on the tops of these rocky ridges where it's very dry with thin soil, and they can hang on and make it and outcompete things that cannot. Things like red oak and such, like deeper, moister soils, where chestnut oak can tolerate those kinds of conditions. Now, one thing I read about this park is that there's a little bit of an odd thing, apparently, because of the soil makeup, that you do tend to find chestnut oak farther down the slopes here rather than only on the ridge tops like you'd expect. And you tend to find sugar maples up on the ridge tops and rather than down at the bottom of the hills like you might expect, because sugar maple likes moist soils. So there's a little bit of a reverse pattern than what you'd expect in this park for some reason, but interesting nonetheless. Okay, this area too, there was some invasive non-native honeysuckle and things down along the road and things where I started. But once you get into this forest, and this is true throughout the ridges of Great Seal State Park, it's not badly invaded by non-native shrubs and things, which are very common in the forests we walk around in southwestern Ohio. So it's much more open. All right, now that's a good thing in most cases. But that pattern also could be enforced by deer, which, you know, graze heavily on young trees and tree seedlings and saplings. So I don't know exactly what the populations of deer look like, other than the buck I almost ran into. But it's a very large area, and I don't suspect every square inch of this park can be mowed down by deer. So it's just a pattern of the vegetation at the moment. So yeah, there's an abundance of chestnut oaks in this part of the woods. It's just a beautiful, breezy day. It's great out here. All right, I think I will advance forward a bit and catch you in just a moment. All right, I've advanced a little ways down the trail, or up the trail in this case, and I'm just pausing by this particularly shaggy shagbark hickory. Okay, it has very long, thin plates, really maximizing its moniker. All right, shagbark hickory. That's a shaggy one. All right, so I've advanced down the trail a little bit further. I've passed a few people and asked about that explosion I heard earlier. And what one fellow believes it was sonic booms from jets that are flying in the area. So that's understandable. That's kind of a relief. Wasn't a bomb probably, or a factory exploding. But I'll try to read about it later today and see if there's any addendum on our little suggestion here. There's a really large tree over there. I might measure it on the way back down, a big white oak. But here's a trail sign. We're going to go up on top of Bunker Hill. And according to this sign, you can go either way. So I presume we're just going to do a circular walk up to the top of Bunker Hill up there and then come back around. A number of other things I've seen since I've advanced that I'll point out to you as we go, including some more fun with fungi. All right, so, all right, let's go a little farther and I'll catch up with you again. All right, we're just moving along the trail, still below the top of Bunker Hill. But just comment there, just looking around at the forest and noting how open it is, how oak dominated it is. This area has a lot of oaks, a few shagbark hickories, but I am starting to see now the sugar maples pick up, which again the pattern is kind of inverted here, where they're more on the ridge tops than at the base of the hills like you'd expect. But this area, though, is very much dominated by those chestnut oaks. They're everywhere. See these trees with a very blocky bark here. But this is a kind of interesting spot. I stand right here, and to my left of me, I have chestnut oaks. To the right is northern red oak. Straight in front of me are several large white oaks. And there are probably a few other species in my sight that I'm not near at the moment. So this is a very oak-dominated forest in terms of the large trees, but they are largely missing from the forest floor. Okay, there's been I think I talked in an episode about how oak regeneration has been a struggle. Oaks have probably seen their heyday in these forests, and now it's tough for them to regenerate for a variety of reasons. The increasing moisture content of our soils with climate change, heavy deer pressure, lack of fire, goes some chipmunks, competitive interactions, and so forth. While it's thought that things like maples, sugar maples, right in front of me, are starting to overtake oaks in a lot of their former habitats they formerly dominated. Other trees like tulip tree also, which I don't see in this area to be that abundant in this particular area, but they can be very abundant and they grow very fast. So here I'm moving through a patch of pawpaws. They've mostly lost their leaves at this point. All these things here. If you remember, pawpaw has that distinct duck-billed bud at the end. It's kind of soft and flattened. Kind of has a duck bill for a terminal bud. One of the ID characters. One of the ways you can ID the tree when it doesn't have leaves. So there's some to the left of me, some very steep hills as well. My guess is that once we get on top of Bunker Hill, there might be some exposed rock. We'll take a look at that. Here's a grand red oak. Oh yeah, there's some beauties here. I've been very impressed with the trees in this park. This is a giant northern red oak. Wow. That's a beautiful tree. There's one just like it, just below. Oh, what the heck? Let's get a measurement on it. Some people go hunting for big feet. I go hunting for big trees. But there's a lot of people that do that, actually. That's kind of a popular activity amongst people I know in this state. Some do both. Yeah, hopefully that will stay. Maybe if I hook it here, it'd be better. Okay. I got some things in the way. Oh, there's evidence that this tree is hollow inside. In past episodes, I've talked about how a lot of these big trees actually are hollow, but they can still stand for a long time because the middle of that tree is not functional really for the tree. All right, so that's a beauty. That's a 50-inch diameter tree. So that's a little over 4 feet in diameter. All right, so we want to do our oak size to age math. Oh, let's just estimate 60, 70 annual rings per foot in diameter. That white oak was more than that actually down there, but this is a red oak. As I've always said, they grow a little faster than white oaks. So let's say 60. You do the math. That's a 250-year-old red oak right there. All right. And they get bigger. There are bigger red oaks than that in the state, for sure. But once they reach that size, you're talking ancient trees. Really old growth trees. You know, the first, Native American Indians have been in this area for a long time, very long time. But the first white colonists, European colonists, were thought to have come here in the late 1700s. So even though there was a lot of development in Ohio by that time, elsewhere, this particular area was not occupied. The towns of Chillicothe and so forth were not settled until the late 1700s. So some of these trees, some of them at least, they might have actually witnessed. They might have been babies or small trees at that time. Some of them, or most of them, have grown back since, okay? Because a lot of these hills were cut over and have regrown since the first European colonists arrived. But there are remnant old growth trees in these places. And typically they were growing in a location where it was tough to cut them, tough to get them out of the woods, cliff sides or steep, deep ravines, or it represents a species that people were not interested in at the time. And then depending on how long the area was, say, in public hands versus private hands, there are parcels of land and individual trees that kind of made it through the gauntlet of colonization and development and forestry and so forth. So those are always fun to find. All right, we've advanced a little ways, and I'm pausing here to just admire this little grove of sassafras. Okay, those trees up there with the partially green, partially gold leaves with the dark furrowed bark. They look a lot like a chestnut oak, in fact, but they have a very dark, kind of uniformly dark bark. Those are pretty large sassafrasses. This is known as more as a smaller tree. And it's also known, of course, for its leaves that have 3 to 4 different shapes. I see a few of them down here. Here's the mitten shape. Okay, it's missing one of its lobes. Or not the mitten shape, excuse me, like a trident. Okay, then there's a shape that is like a mitten with one lobe and the rest of the leaf. And then there are leaves that are just entire, simple leaves that are unlobed, like that one. Now, one thing I actually learned about relatively recently is that young trees tend to exhibit the multiple forms of leaves more so than old trees. As the trees get older and older, they tend to have mostly just the rounded, unlobed leaves. So these trees up there, as I look from the ground, it seems to be largely the case. I'm seeing mostly the rounded, entire, simple leaves. They're unlobed. But I do see some of the different kinds on the ground. So just a little fun fact. Okay, sassafras, of course, you know, when I was a kid, we would dig out the roots of small trees and make it like a tea out of it. Okay, sarsaparilla. So it's aromatic. People still do that, but you shouldn't, because it's one of these plants that has compounds, chemical compounds, one called safrole, for example, that is thought to be potentially cancer-causing if you, drank enough of it, ate enough of it. Again, most people don't consume enough of that stuff for it to have any effect. but it is something that you should be aware of, okay, when you partake of plant natural products. All right, I'm stopping here just to take a look at what shagbark hickory nuts look like. Okay, now there's a large shagbark hickory right here to my left. And as I was walking, I was realizing the ground was completely littered by the nuts from this tree. Okay, they're all over the ground. You know, some of them are loose from their husk. So this is the husk part of the hickory nut. And of course, the nut meat itself is inside this hard shell inside. So this husk it's thick and hard, but it's softer than the shell of the nut itself. And I don't have anything to break this open with, okay? But this hickory nut is actually edible, okay? If you crack that open, you'll find a nut in there that's a lot like a pecan, okay? So pecans are basically a species of hickory. And this is shagbark hickory, but you can eat these as well. The nuts aren't as large as a pecan. I think most people recognize pecans, but they are edible. It would take some time to get enough of them to eat, but you can do it. And people still do it, okay? But it has this 4-part husk on the outside. It's green as it's developing and then kind of turns yellow before it drops. So you collect the hickory nuts, break them open, and just roast them and eat them, or pound them into a flour, and you can put them in breads and things like that, pancakes, all kinds of things like that. I did want to point out on this one already has been eaten. That little hole there is from a seed predator, not sure what yet, but who's made a meal out of this hickory nut. Well, it turns out that I ran out of batteries, so I'm not being smart about my walks here lately. This walk turned out to be a lot farther than I thought, but it's still beautiful. And I was clued in along the way by somebody that, to take a little rogue trail to hook up to the trail to get to the top of Bunker Hill. I had been skirting around the bottom of the hill for quite a ways and expecting the trail to rise to the ridge, but the trail I was on actually doesn't do that. But someone clued me on to how to do that. So, and after following that little spur for a quarter mile or so, I came upon this little point, which has a nice swing. Okay. I don't know who in the world brought this thing up here, but it's awesome. And behind me, there's a full metal outdoor dining table and 4 chairs. So anyone interested in ridgetop dining can do it right here on top of Bunker Hill. And as I look out into the distance, I'll turn my camera. Okay, we're overlooking parts of Chillicothe, where the truck factory is, and on through where the town of Chillicothe itself is. I hear a train down there in the valley somewhere. So we're not quite to the top of this ridge, but we're out on a kind of a point that juts out. And it's just beautiful. And right at the moment, I have the place to myself. And these hills, by the way, they top out at about 1,200 feet. And just to put that in perspective, the tallest hill in Ohio is 1,550 feet in the vicinity of Bell Fountain, Ohio. So we're still 300 feet or so below the highest, quote, mountains in Ohio, but they really stand out from the valley below. So they're really, they're prominent, and reminds me a lot of Pennsylvania, where I grew up. So I'm gonna walk a little further, perhaps do another video like this, and then see what I can do off my phone and remind myself to bring extra batteries next time. I'm on the ridgetop proper at Bunker Hill, and this is just straight down the trail view. And I'm facing mostly north at this point. So if you look out to my right, out beyond the trees, you can see the ridges to the east, okay, in this park and beyond. Okay, and if you look to my left, Okay, you can see further ridges to the west. Okay, and still lots of colorful trees in the mix as well. And so the town of Chillicothe itself is in this direction from where I am. But it's just beautiful. I mean, most people who are from Ohio who's never gotten to this area would be amazed to think this is Ohio. Okay, this kind of hilly, steep ridged terrain. On either side of this trail, left or right, it drops down very steeply on both sides. So I'm like on a razor, not quite razor thin edged ridge, but very sharp ridge, very steep on each side. Makes for real rough and ready terrain. I love it. Okay, I'll bid you farewell here, and catch you next time. Take it easy.